everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and I hope you enjoyed the clips and photos at the beginning of this very mini vlog. Sush and I had a great time this weekend. We got to go and have a nice night out at our local bookstore and get to see Ted Chiang speak and talk about some of his thoughts and about his short stories. So I just wanted to talk about what we did, and then I'll have a giveaway to talk about at the end. So the bookstore that we went to is a really cool local independent bookstore. Independent bookstores always are great. They have such awesome displays and such knowledgeable people who work there. There's so much passion. But we have not traditionally been people who go to local bookstores, especially because we don't generally buy very many books. But recently we have decided that for certain books that we love so much, we want to own physical copies, we'll go ahead and go to the local bookstore and pick them up. Part of this was inspired by Njeri at ONYX Pages and Russell at Ink and Paper Blog. They both really emphasize supporting your favorite authors and shopping at local bookstores, and we thought this is something that we want to do. So I had been picking up a book this week, the third book in the Love Sugar Magic series called A Mixture of Mischief, which I am so excited to get to read, but I probably won't get to for another few weeks at least. I was so excited about this. So I went to pick this up this week, and I discovered that our bookstore was going to be having a Ted Chiang event over the weekend. So Ted Chiang won an award for Exhalation, for like a local regional award, and they were just doing a celebration of him, having some of his author friends come and talk about how great his work is, having him talk and having him do a signing. So we went to our bookstore, we looked around, it's just such a great bookstore, and then we got to hear him talk. So let me just say that if you ever get the chance, go see Ted Chiang talk. He is such a thoughtful, considerate person, and it comes through in the way that he talks. I think that everything you'd hope he would be based on his stories, he is. He thinks very, very carefully about what he wants to say. He has a lot of really positive messages, and he's just very kind. Also, so cute because he was totally nervous, and you could tell that public speaking is maybe not his favorite thing in the world to do, but he really wanted to be there and share his thoughts and answer people's questions. Just the kindest person, and so much thought and consideration into every response that he gave to any questions people asked. It was just wonderful. And at the end, he took a lot of time to chat with each person when signing books. It was just such a great person. So what he did was he first kind of gave a little bit of a talk about the importance of science fiction. A lot of the people in this bookshop were not necessarily people who had huge fandom of science fiction. So there was kind of a range of people. And so he was talking about why science fiction is such an important genre. And he talked about how if you're not familiar with science fiction, you might have seen science fiction movies. And in media, often science fiction is portrayed in a little bit of a different way than it is in books. So often in movies, he talked about how this is a much more conservative story of good versus evil, where the world is good and something evil comes, and the righteous ones must fight against that evil and get rid of it and return everything to the status quo. But how in a lot of science fiction books, that's not the story. The story is much more progressive. It's a story of change. It's a story of transformation. And I really liked what he had to say about how in science fiction, you're looking at the idea of what if this change, this technology, this development happened? How would we adapt to that? How would we create a better new world? And I really liked that message. If you've seen the video that I did with Wendy from BookNerdTV, I'll link her information and the video below, talking about N.K. Jemison's How Long Till Black Future Month short story collection. One of the things that we noticed there was the idea of transformation and how you should choose that over the status quo. So this is definitely a theme that I have noticed. Oh, and also Njeri at ONYX Pages, who again I will link below, has talked before on her channel about how science fiction is one of those excellent vessels for imagining a better future and how that can be really used in terms of social justice to imagine a better future for those who are oppressed or marginalized. So I loved his little speech. It was so beautiful. And then he took some audience questions. Oh, and one other thing that he talked about, the people who were talking about him before he went up on stage were some other authors talking about how great his work is and how he deserves this award. And one of them was an author friend who teased him a little bit about their differences in terms of what kind of sci-fi they like, especially what kind of sci-fi movies they like. And she mentioned that he really likes the movie Moon from 2009 with Sam Rockwell, and how it was just so funny because she teased him about not liking that and how they kept getting into arguments where he thought Moon was wonderful and she thought it wasn't. And this is funny because Moon is like my favorite sci-fi movie. And Sosh and I had just been talking about this the other day about how great Moon was. So I thought that was very funny. And I mentioned that to him when we went up and got our book signed. So the other things that he talked about in response to audience questions were a lot about kind of his writing process. Somebody asked about how he gets his ideas and like what he does with that. And he said that generally what happens is he'll have some idea bouncing around in his head. And if it just stays there and won't leave, then he knows that he should probably come up with a story to explore that idea. So I think that it sounded like for him, it was really a concept or an idea that needed to be fleshed out in a story. And so the plot and the characters and everything like that came afterwards. And that is so in line with what I feel when I read his stories. It feels all about the idea. And then he talked a little bit too about why he chooses short stories, why short stories and novelettes and novellas are his format of choice. And he talked about how historically a lot of science fiction has lived in the magazine. The magazine is where science fiction has been truly moving the needle forward, truly exploring new ideas, and that these kind of more epic, longer saga type series are a newer thing, not necessarily more traditional for science fiction, and how he feels like when you have a longer book or a series, it demands more complexity. So it demands that you're exploring many different plot lines or different ideas. Whereas when you have a short story, novelette, novella, you can take one single idea and explore just that single idea. And he really likes that. And again, I think that is very in line with what I get from his short stories. They are just this what if, and they explore just that single idea and take it to its kind of logical conclusion, trying to understand and bring up questions. So I actually have two videos, one which is talking about Exhalation, which is his new collection, and one which is talking about Stories of Your Life and Others, which is his older collection. I will link these down below, but they're basically kind of not really reviews, but just looking at what questions each of these short stories is bringing up. I really, really love both of these short story collections. They're so good. They bring up so many questions. So I loved hearing him talk about why he chooses to write the way that he does and what he's trying to do with those stories. One other thing somebody brought up was just asking him about recommendations, like what sort of authors influenced him in science fiction and what authors would he recommend. So he said that Isaac Asimov, unsurprisingly, was sort of his entryway into science fiction, that when he was around 10 or 11, he was reading Asimov and just so intrigued, especially by the kind of science approach that Asimov had. He recommended a couple of other authors for people who like his works. In particular, he recommended Greg Egan, who is an Australian author that he thinks is kind of similar in his style, as well as José Luis Borges, who he said just has very beautiful writing. And he made a comment of, if I had read Sorry, did I get that right? Jorge Luis Borges, if he had read him before, he might have just been like, well, there's no point in me writing. So it was very cute. He also mentioned a couple of other books that he thought were really worth reading in terms of how they do similar things with science fiction or other literary genres, asking questions and really seeing what could be. So first he talked about Engine Summer by John Crowley, which sounds like maybe it's a slightly older work. I'm not sure if it's even science fiction, but he said that that really showed him what could be, what fiction could develop, what sort of ideas. He also mentioned We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen J. Fowler. He said this isn't science fiction, but it does what a lot of science fiction really has the potential to do, which is asks those questions of what could be. So I just wanted to share that with you guys in case you wanted some book recommendations from Ted Chiang. And then we went to the signing and it was just wonderful. He was so kind. And luckily it was like a really small little local bookshop, and it wasn't a huge crowd. I mean, it was full, but the bookshop itself is kind of small. So it was just really nice, and he really spent time with everybody. It was so sweet. And then Sush and I went over to a Puerto Rican restaurant that was next door, got some dinner, and it was so great. I got plátanos, which I love, but for the first time I got something called pernil, which is like a pork type of dish, and I had just read about pernil for the very first time earlier that afternoon. I'd been reading this book called Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson, and in it she's living in New York in like the 70s and makes best friends with a girl from Puerto Rico, and there's a festival at her friend's house and they have pernil, and there was this big celebratory dish, and I was like, I just read about this, and I tried it. It was so good. So it was just such a wonderful evening. We had such a great time, and since we decided to go ahead and just buy a copy at that bookshop of Exhalation and get it signed to support the bookstore as well, we now have 2 copies of Exhalation. So we're going to go ahead and give away our previous copy of Exhalation, which is not signed, sorry. But if anybody is interested in getting this book, I would be happy to mail it to you. Anywhere in the world is fine. However, you do need to do a couple of things. So first, you should be over 18, or you should have parental consent, because you're gonna have to give me your address. Second, I am a complete avoider of social media, so the only way I tend to get into contact with people is through Goodreads. So you need to have like a Goodreads account and be willing to tell me what that is, so that I can message you on there and can ask you for your address. And then the other thing is just to make this fun. In order to enter this giveaway, first, let me know that you're interested in the giveaway, and then second, tell me what your favorite short story is and what you love about that short story. I'm such a fan of short stories, or if you've never read a short story before but you're really interested, you can tell me about that too. I don't want to exclude anybody, but I think that really, Ted Chiang does amazing short stories. I've fallen in love with the short story format, and I'd love to share this with anybody. So just go ahead and leave me a comment down below if you'd like to enter the giveaway. If you just want to comment anyway and you don't want to enter the giveaway, just tell me that you don't want to enter the giveaway. I will go ahead and do a kind of like a random comment picker next week. So I'll give 1 week for this giveaway. I believe that next weekend is something like March 1st, something like that. Whatever Sunday is, Sunday, March 1st, will be the end of the giveaway. And on Monday, I'll go ahead and use a random comment picker. Let the person know with a response in the comments that the random comment picker chose them. And then we can connect over Goodreads, and I can send this out to you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the few clips that I had. I wasn't allowed to record the actual speakers. The bookstore didn't feel comfortable with that, but I at least got a little bit of footage of the bookshop, and they did allow pictures, and I got some video of our food because it was delicious. So if any of you guys have gone to really interesting book signings as well, I'd love to hear about it. Just leave me a comment down below. In any case, I will look forward to talking to you guys later.